Well, it has been 9 weeks since we have gathered together at our facility as a church, but some good has come from it. We have definitely increased our ability to make videos, to communicate with you, and just recently we got an app for our church. We're really getting with the times. So we'd like you all to check your email inboxes and look for a link to the new app for our church that we're going to be using to communicate with everyone on a more regular basis. And you'll find out in just a minute why it's very important that you get the app. The other thing is, this whole time that we have not been able to gather together, we definitely appreciate your patience and your concern as we've tried to navigate the balance between protecting everyone's health but also ministering to people's spiritual needs. And after much discussion and prayer and deliberation with our deacons and leadership, we've decided that it is time for us to start gathering together again. There are a lot of things that we don't know. We don't know if this virus is going to come back and wreak havoc on our physical health. We don't know what really the full extent that this is having on the spiritual and the relational health of people within our church. But what we do know is that we can make a concerted effort to prevent further spread of COVID-19 and still minister to people's spiritual needs. So with all of that in mind, we're going to have our first worship service again together at this facility on May 24th. Now, this service is going to be limited to 50 people due to the health mandates that were laid down from the governor's office of our state. However, if more than 50 people would like to come to an in-person service, and I sure hope that there will be a lot more than 50, we'll hold as many services as we need to have a rotation of 50 people at a time to have worship together again. Now remember that app that I told you about. It's very important that you register for the worship service on May 24th if you'd like to attend. And you can do that using our new app. It's very easy. You click the link in your email, and then as soon as you open the app, you click on events, and you just put in your name and one form of contact. Here comes the train. You know I'm at UBC. So if you're planning to come to our worship service on May 24th, you must register. And if you register, please do show up as well. And we want to accommodate as many people as we can. Also, we have a written plan to mitigate the spread of the virus if that is still a possibility. And we really want to minister to people in person spiritually. We want to be able to see each other again and start gathering as a church. That's literally what Ecclesia means, is the gathering, the people that are called out and gather together to worship Jesus Christ. So we're going to do everything that we can to both protect the health of everybody that comes to our worship service, but also to start ministering to each other in a real, tangible, physical way with our presence and our gathering with each other. So if you're able, if you don't have particular health concerns, I hope that you will join us here at our building again on May 24th.
Jesus. journey through the book of Ecclesiastes, we have come to the last chapter. I've always been very much intrigued by the life of King Solomon. He was the child of David and Bathsheba. He wrote the Proverbs, such wisdom there. He was the king of ancient Israel who was of renown and very effective that way. He was a man of great achievement, and yet in this last chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes, as he's growing old, toward the end of his life, he recognizes the futility. He likes to use the word vanity and futility over and over in his writings because he sees the emptiness of life without God, and he keeps turning to God for meaning and purpose and a sense of hope as he's growing older. This is a fascinating passage of Scripture. It has some cryptic language in it that is interesting to us. For example, it says, there's a day coming when mighty men stoop. They begin to shuffle and walk slowly, and that was him. And he says the grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through windows grow dim. Many believe it's an allusion to vision starting to fade as the windows grow dim, and the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low, that hearing begins to go, and he doesn't hear like he used to. It's like the door is shut on all of the sounds of life. And he says one will arise at the sound of the bird. He sleeps light. He doesn't sleep well. All it takes is a bird to chirp to wake him up. And all the daughters of song sing softly. He begins to lose some of the zest and just appetite for life that he had when he was younger. He says, furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road, that caution that tends to follow the steps of people in this stage of life. It has come to Solomon. He says the almond tree blossoms. The blossoms of an almond are white. His hair had turned white, and the grasshopper drags himself along. And then the man who had 700 wives says the caperberry is ineffective. That was an ancient herbal aphrodisiac. And so Solomon is making a statement there about the ineffectiveness of the caperberry. For man goes to his eternal home while mourners go about in the street. So his perspective and his values and his hopes are having to turn toward heaven. He ends the passage by saying, the conclusion of all of it is this: when all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments. That's a theme throughout the Scriptures. It is a conclusion that many come to in life. Fear God, respect God, believe in God, know that he is, that he's real, that he's more real than what's fading around us, and keep his commandments. There's not much time left to just do the right thing. This applies to every person. And then his last verse in this chapter of this book is, for God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Solomon realizes that our life will soon be over. You know, he says in the chapter, he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no more delight in life. That today's the day to seize the opportunity to be a person of hope and vigor and praise, regardless of what we think we might have left. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds begin to return after the rain, you thought it was over and the clouds come back. In the day that the watchmen of the house tremble and mighty men stoop. And then he goes into this litany of the brevity of life and the importance of an eternal perspective. He couldn't work anymore. He didn't plan anymore. He didn't have a lot of future to look forward to. It was like he was locked down in his own body. It was like his life was beginning to look away toward the future, and he was saying two or three things to us that are very important. He was saying, seize the day. Today is the opportunity for praise and faith and hope and to go on in the strength of the Lord and it will soon be past. And when it's gone, our opportunity to trust Him and to prove His goodness in our life and our sense of dependence on Him will be over. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. But this life has a purpose. It is our opportunity to know Him and to make Him known, to live by faith. The Bible says that the angels long to stoop down and peer into this challenge that men and women have to trust God through the difficulties of earthly life. They know nothing of that. They're residents of heaven, and we will be one day. But we have this opportunity to let our work be the work of the Lord. Let our joy be the joy of the Lord. Let our purpose be the will of God. And let our strength be His strength. Let our future be what He has for us. God has given us all we need for godliness and life. It's a good thing that we're going through a time when all the trappings that distract us and make us busy have just been shut down around us, and we find who is in us, and we walk in the Spirit. For the days are evil, but the goodness of the Lord overcomes, and we walk in the Spirit by faith and in victory in Jesus. We just want to remember that and not let anything cause us to turn our eyes toward what's under our feet. When the outlook fails, try the uplook, and God will always be there on His throne, waiting to receive us with a well done, thou good and faithful servant.
Joy and life, and let me
I think one of the best examples of the faithfulness that we see in Ecclesiastes is the Old Testament character of Daniel. I love Daniel's story because no matter what was going on in his life, he was faithful to God. He chose to worship God and remain devoted to Him no matter what was going on in his life. Daniel was exiled from his homeland to the land of Babylon, and he experienced many different regime changes while he was in this foreign land. But his one true king was the God of the Bible the entire time. And I want to invite you to open your Bibles and turn to Daniel chapter 6 with me and look at this amazing story of Daniel's faithfulness. It says, starting in verse 1, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss." So the king has this idea to put these representatives in place for him to carry out his decrees. And Daniel was given this job. Verse 3, "Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him." It's remarkable here how Daniel, a man of God, was able to function within this political society of the ancient kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. And he was distinguished above all the other governors and representatives of the king because he had this spirit of God in him. Verse 4 says, "Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom." They had this jealousy against Daniel, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." This is so remarkable that Daniel's faithfulness to God actually resulted in a respect for the men around him and an interaction with the people around him that was found to be blameless. That is what a faithful follower of the God of the Bible looks like. And they say, "There's no way we're going to be able to find any complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." They're like, his only fault is the high degree of faithfulness that he shows to his God. So here's the plan they cook up. Verse 6, "These high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, 'O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction, that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, should be cast into a den of lions. Oh, now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked.' Therefore, King Darius, obviously liking this plan, for it stroked his ego, signed the document and injunction." So Daniel, even though he was blameless, he had people that were jealous of him, and he was becoming prey to vicious politics that were surrounding him. What will Daniel do in this situation? These politicians are master manipulators that are trying to frame Daniel to get him unjustly punished. Verse 10, it says, "When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. And he got down on his knees, 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, get this, as he had done previously. Daniel did not do this to spite the law and the injunction that these corrupt politicians and the king signed. Daniel got down on his knees and he prayed because his heart was faithful to God. Daniel was not trying to get himself in trouble with the governing authorities. Obviously, he was not trying to pick a fight. He was not trying to be a martyr. He was simply trying to remain faithful to his God whom he loved. This is why Daniel is such a beautiful picture of faithfulness. But he still had these enemies that connived against him and manipulated the king into framing him for a crime that was hardly worthy of the conviction that he was about to receive. Daniel is he displays faith that we are called to copy, to strive after. Because there's nothing more important in this life than being faithful to God and worshiping him no matter what is going on around us.
Oh, soul, are you weary and troubled? No light in the darkness.
As we continue looking at Daniel's story here, things take a very, very unfortunate turn. It says in verse 10, Daniel knew that the document had been signed, so he went into his upper chamber and he got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. May we all be men and women of faith like Daniel. But then, here's what happened in verse 11. These men came by agreement and found Daniel, making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And the king answered and said, the thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who was one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you. O king, the injunction you have signed, but he makes his petition 3 times a day. Verse 14, then the king, when he had heard these words, was much distressed, and he set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. And then these men came by agreement to the king, and said to the king, know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. In other words, Daniel's fate is sealed. He must go into the lion's den. Verse 16, then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. And then the king declared Daniel, this is amazing. He says, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. And then the king went into his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. The king had been duped by his governors. His heart was troubled because his governor Daniel, whom he honored and was very proud of, had been unjustly thrown into the den of lions. But this was all God's plan, to try and to prove the faithfulness of God, but more importantly, to put on display the faithfulness of God to his faithful servant Daniel. Verse 19, at the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. And the king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve, continually been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. Daniel is a shining example here of faithfulness, and it's certainly one that we should follow. But we need to look at what happens here with the satraps, the governors that the king appointed. The king was exceedingly glad, verse 23, and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, those satraps who framed Daniel, they were brought and cast into the den of lions, they and their children and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all of their bones in pieces. And then King Darius proceeded to make a decree that nobody should say anything against the God of Daniel, because the God of Daniel clearly works signs and wonders and clearly delivers as he delivered his servant Daniel. And this chapter ends in verse 28 saying, "This Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian." This is just a remarkable passage because we see God being faithful in such a dramatic and illustrative way. But we have to ask ourselves, man, why the violent judgment that was inflicted on these satraps? After framing Daniel, they were thrown into the lion's den with their wives and their children. And we have to take a sober look at this because although many of us may identify with Daniel immediately when we feel like people are treating us poorly, we have to realize that all of us have a little satrap in us. All of us have the corrupting sin inside our hearts that led these satraps to do such an evil thing to Daniel. And the judgment for sin is death. Being thrown into the lion's den and your physical bodies being torn to shreds is a light punishment compared to the eternity of torment that is promised to those who turned their back on God. This is such a powerful picture of the gospel here. Daniel was relying solely on the deliverance of his God, whereas these satraps were relying on their own cunning, on their own ability to do away with the people that were messing up their lives. They thought they were good, but the judgment turned around back on them, and they had to face the consequences of their wickedness. You see, when you come to know the Lord, the God of the Bible, Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, it's not an improvement to an already good life. It is a total and complete rescuing from an impending doom and destruction akin to being thrown into a den of lions and ripped to shreds. But the good news of the gospel is that there is no condemnation for those who are in Jesus Christ. It's so easy for us to think that we are always the martyr, that when bad things happen to us, it's just evil people having their way with us. And we feel like Daniel a lot of times, but I think what we have to realize is that each person's individual relationship with God is what matters most. Daniel is a wonderful example of exhibiting faithfulness continually as the king of Persia described it. Daniel is an excellent example of proven faithfulness in the face of adversity. And I just want to take a minute to make a couple of applications that are contemporary. I mean, all of us are finding ourselves in a very difficult situation right now, and there is a lot of politics going on in this whole coronavirus situation, and people are lining up on either side of how serious this coronavirus is or how serious the economic effects are. But I want to challenge you. The most important thing in your life is that you choose to worship God no matter what. That you seek faithfulness to God, not a political party. That's what Daniel did. His life was about faithfulness to God. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and he prayed and showed devotion to God. And in the end, God delivered him. All the other satraps, they played the politics. And they got the judgment that was coming to them. They were relying on their own ability to preserve themselves. And their end was in the lion's den. I want to beg you, don't turn to any politics for your salvation. There will be none found there. Salvation is only found in Jesus Christ and devotion to him. May we all realize that Christ is really all we have in this life. and that all of the adversity that we experience is a test to prove not only our faithfulness to God, but His infinite ability to deliver us from any and all circumstances.
For so long I carried the weight of my past, crippled by burdens like stones on my back. I thought I had fallen too far from your grace, but you came and showed me the way. When I was a lost soul searching, you were the ground beneath my feet. When I was a blind man begging, you were the eyes so I could see. When the smoke was rising up, you were the air that I could breathe. You gave me hope, you gave me something to believe. Now I'm alive and born again, rescued from the grip of sin. God, your love came crashing in, pulled me out of the fire. I'm a survivor. Now all I can see are the fields of your grace. Wherever I run, you're leading the way. You shook the shackles off my feet, found redemption on my knees. You gave me hope, you gave me something to believe. Now I'm alive and born again, rescued from the grip of sin. God, your love came crashing in, pulled me out of the fire. I'm a survivor. Oh, I'm a survivor. Yeah, yeah. You're my God. You're my fighter. You make me a survivor. You're my God. You're my fighter. You make me a survivor. You're my God. You're my fighter. You make me a survivor. Now I'm alive and born again, rescued from the grip of sin. God, your love came crashing in, pulled me out of the fire. I'm a survivor. Oh, I'm a survivor. You pulled me out of the fire. I'm a survivor.